Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Bragg, and this is A Choice Less Travelled, where I'm exploring lots of different choices that you can make to help you manage your mind, body, and soul. For those of you that have followed my work for a while, you'll know that I am passionately obsessed with the mind-body connection and how suppressed emotions manifest as disease in the body. So I'm delighted to have with me today Dr. Gabe Roberts, who has a wealth of experience in this area. So he specializes in psychosomatic work, the effective treatment and reversal of various different physiological conditions, autoimmune conditions that all have their root cause in suppressed emotions. So I'm very excited to hear what he's got to say. Welcome to the podcast, Gabe. How are you doing?
Hi, Rachel. I'm doing excellent. Thank you for having me here.
You're welcome. So I'm going to dive straight in with the first question, if that's okay with you. So what I want to explain it for people is, what is psychosomatic work? What does that mean? And what do you do?
So, psychosomatic works. Psychosomatic means psycho means psyche or the soul of the body. You could also term it the mind, where soma is the physical body. And it has some basis in, it's been around for hundreds of years, but really the basis of it is the body can't even move a finger without a single thought.
Mm.
Everything is controlled by thought. And more or less, what research is really starting to pinpoint is just how much of our body is integrated with what our mind is telling us to do, even on a very subliminal basis without our conscious awareness. So, my work is helping people figure out mystery illnesses and chronic illnesses that are not being alleviated with either conventional approaches, or more often than not, even the natural approaches are often exhausted as well, where
Mm.
they are taking ideal supplements, they're using minerals, they are taking and drinking clean, filtered water or spring water, and eating, fresh organic food. Yet there's still some kind of symptoms they're dealing with. Those people contact me, and we usually regress to the cause, find out what's there, let them vent out any kind of emotions that have been built up over the years, and get a chance to kind of change the memories to something that's more ideal for them.
Mm.
And with that, there's a lot of love and forgiveness that we incorporate, because in all my years of work as a functional medicine doctor, an energetic worker, and a diplomat in nutrition, what I can tell you is nothing heals like love and forgiveness. So
Mm.
uh, that's that's a that's a big piece of it as well.
That's amazing. And what sort of conditions do people have where they have explored the natural route, they've explored the conventional route? What is that? Autoimmune conditions, headaches, gut issues? What sort of conditions is it that people are coming to you with?
All of the above, all of
Mm.
the above. A lot of digestive disturbances, and usually these people have already tried the natural approach. They've already done cleanses, they've already done, parasite cleanses and work, and they are usually the type of people that are unresponsive to approaches that are usually what they're trying to do is get their nervous system balanced in some way.
Mm.
They've been told that their fight or flight is very high, and so their gut's not going to heal because of that. So naturally, they're doing things like meditative practices and mindfulness exercises. But these are oftentimes inadequate for people that have had early experiences, maybe in the womb or during the first 5 years of life, that have really shaped the template and wired their nervous system a certain way, to where their fight or flight is always kind of set as the default mode.
Mm.
And what this means is an average person goes to a trance-like state, or a state of where they have an altered focus on something, anywhere from 15 to 50 times an hour. And if what we now know is, if a person has a memory show up from the past, the brainwave state matches as if that memory is occurring right now. The
Mm,
physiological distress activates. So that's why it's so difficult for a person to go into a meditative state and get healing,
mm,
because once they come out of that state, it's like the default mode kicks back in. They're back into the fight or flight state, and of course things are unable to heal, especially gut linings and things like that. So,
mm.
but gut issues, chronic pain, headaches, autoimmune, um, and mystery illnesses. I had a gentleman contact me once whose arm just went paralyzed for no reason whatsoever. And he
Wow.
just suddenly couldn't even move his entire arm. And it was unresponsive to chiropractic and some other modalities he
Mm.
had done as well. So,
It's really fascinating the work that you talk about in terms of when you regress people back to the womb, because I imagine a lot of people come maybe in their 30s or their 40s potentially with a chronic illness or a gut issue or something like that. And then you find that the root cause was something that happened either in the womb or in the first 5 years of life. And then it's affecting them all of these years later. How does that work? I think that's really hard for people to get their head round, actually.
right. So there's a couple of things that we need to understand about the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is where imagination is. It's your
Mm,
long-term memory. Um, it's also the protective mind.
mm,
So it's going to protect certain perceptions that you have. It's also the most powerful goal-achieving agency known to humanity.
mm,
For a large part, throughout millennia, ancient wise men, philosophers, people have known that there's a significant power within them that can achieve great things if you can just learn how to work with that part of you. In fact, in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus Christ says these words. He says, "If you can make the two into one, you can say to the mountain, 'Move, mountain,' and the mountain will
mm,
move."
mm,
What he's implying there is making the conscious and the subconscious mind as one,
mm,
because the subconscious is a part of us that's a universal mind. It's connected to everything and all things. And it's the part of us that you can sense if somebody's staring at you. It's also the part of you that will warn you if danger's nearby.
mm,
A little whim, telling you don't take this exit, stay straight on the road. Little things like that. Of course, if the
mm,
exit, there's maybe it's blocked off or something at the end of it. So the subconscious mind is the most powerful goal achieving agency known to humanity. And it's been known through millennia that. But the second part is that it cannot judge a single suggestion.
mm,
So it doesn't have the ability to differentiate between right and wrong.
mm,
Whatever goes in and starts to form that foundation, it just accepts. And why the womb and the first few years are usually talked about the most as the root cause is because that's the template. Those are
mhm,
the most powerful memories that a person has, regardless if they remember them consciously or not. So oftentimes what happens when we do regressions with a person and try to find the root cause, and I do them all indirectly. So I don't
mhm,
ever imply or assume that it's going to be in the first year of life or whatever.
mhm,
I let the person's unconscious mind take us where we need to go. And oftentimes it's when something occurred in the womb and there's a fear, there's a terror, there's a sudden feeling that a mother has uh, when she's suddenly realizes she's pregnant.
mm,
And maybe it was an unexpected pregnancy. Maybe it's not the right time in her life for this. Maybe she's young and confused and doesn't have a lot of foundations built to where she thinks she can be a good mother at the time. It could even be maybe the person she had a one night stand with is not
mm,
someone who she wanted to have a child with. Those are all just different arbitrary scenarios that I've seen several times in people.
mm.
Um, but here's what's important to understand is at the moment of conception is when we actually learn the most. It's
Wow.
when we're it's when we are the most absorbent. And up until that moment, all we know is divine. All we know is bliss, harmony, and we can say this: one with God, one with universe, one with infinite intelligence. Okay, that's what happens whenever when we are brought into Earth. We are pure consciousness compressed to a single cell, and all we still know is one with divine, one with God. And then comes that moment of horror, or the moment of fear, or the moment of immediate regret when a mother realizes she's pregnant and doesn't want that. So that conception is when the baby, the single cell organism, is the most absorbent, and that's the very first imprint they get, or, oh no, I'm not supposed to have this baby right now. So that forms kind of the foundation. And what happens after that is environmental experiences begin to occur that are in resonant or somewhat harmony with that. Your unconscious mind starts to link similar experiences to that initial one, like a little magnet. And every little magnet that comes, it doesn't have to be exact, 30%. If it's 30% similar to that, like sadness and sorrow and blue, if they're in resonance, they all get to link to that same perception. And every time a link gets added, it's like more weight and more weight and more weight gets added to that initial perception that was first formed, in the womb. And once that perception builds enough weight behind it, it's usually sometime around 35 to 40 years old. Everyone's a little different. Once enough insignificant little perceptions by themselves add enough weight to that initial perception, it suddenly becomes so heavy that the ambitiousness of the subconscious mind's ability to achieve a goal suddenly sees that as a priority and says, okay, we got to make this come to pass. We have to make this come to pass. And again, that's usually new for people. They're usually not used to hearing that kind of thing. Sometimes they're like, well, what do you mean a self-mutilation program? Or, it's usually not something that they're even aware of. But again, when we're doing this work, about 80% of our work is just indirect questions. So it's not implying anything. It's just us asking their mind to take us to the most significant event, and that's usually where it takes us to, something like that.
It's fascinating. So the self-mutilation program, is that basically the subconscious mind effectively trying to destroy the body based on this perception they formed in the womb or in those early years of life, and then that's what manifests as disease in the body?
That's exactly what it is. It's the idea that the subconscious mind, I'll just kind of say it summarized. If a child between the womb and around age 5 learns early on that mom and dad would be much better off if I wasn't here, that becomes the basis for a self-mutilation program. If they would be better off if I wasn't here, they learn that at an early age. And usually the parents are programmed in their own ways, their own painful ways. It's not something that they're directly intentionally doing. It's just they're carrying on their own programs. Two love-starved adults come together and have a child, and they didn't want to at this time, is usually kind of the scenario. Okay. They've never had love. They've never felt love. Dr. Bruce Lipton, a mentor of mine, says easily 80% of people would fail a muscle test on if they could love themselves, if they could say they could love themselves, if they could love themselves in a mirror, look at a mirror and say it, especially first thing in the morning before you even go to the restroom. How do you feel about that? How uncomfortable is that? Well, that just kind of touches the ground on what a self-mutilation program is, but the self-mutilation program is a little bit more, on the extreme end. But if you look at the goal-achieving agency of the subconscious, and a 5-year-old, by the time they're 5 years old, they have a solidified, complete puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle. the puzzle is complete. All the pieces have been put in place. All these little perceptions have been built, and it's built a complex puzzle of how they feel in the world, their role in the world, what they deserve, what they don't deserve. All of those things are put in place around by the age of 5. And so they grow into, as an adult, having that puzzle running in place. And by the time they're, 35, 40 years old, 45 years old, enough weight has been added to that perception to where suddenly the ambitiousness of the subconscious mind kicks in, and it says, we're not supposed to be here. We're not supposed to be here. Otherwise, how could you possibly explain somebody who does everything right, eats right, takes all the right nutrients? They've had some really in-depth lab work done. Usually the clients that see me have seen the best of the best that functional medicine can offer. Sometimes they're doing, and I've done this before myself, run these kind of tests on people, 16 pages DNA analysis test of just a little stool sample. That's pretty specific. And the test says everything's great. They've got good flora. They've got, no infectious components. And you ask the person how they feel, and they're just like, I'm okay. That's not a person who has the vigor of living, has the vigor of life. And so that's something that no lab test is going to be able to pick up.
It's fascinating, I think, how many people didn't feel love in their childhood. So in the work that I do with my clients, I regress them back to find out where the root cause of their problem came from. And it will always be, I'm not good enough, or I wasn't loved, no one loves me. But what I find scary as a parent myself is that sometimes a child can form that perception based on the mum just going to work. And then the child says, well, mum's gone to work, therefore she doesn't care about me and I'm not loved, which may not be the case. So the mum is just like, I need to make a living, I need to earn this money. But the child doesn't have the emotional maturity to be able to understand that and process it. So is it true then that children can form perceptions of not being loved when a mother or a father could have very good intentions for that child, and they could feel so much love for that child, but the child can still feel like they're not loved?
That's very much true. I mean, that's absolutely true, because like you said, they don't have the spiritual, emotional maturity to understand, and kids will take things quite personal. They will take things personal. So if something bad happens to a child, they usually have the dialogue running of, well, if this bad thing happened to me, it must be because I'm a bad person, or I deserve this in some way. So they will take things out of context and tend to generalize the broad picture. And one reason why is because, they're operating from a subconscious standpoint. They're in theta wave, their brains. So one thing you want to know about the subconscious mind is it's not logical or analytical. It's completely generalized. And what that means for listeners is, let's say that you're sitting outside and it's just the sun's going down. It's a beautiful evening, and you see some mountains, and you see the sun setting behind the hillside, and you're watching this, and suddenly you see down by the mountains, a person has a campfire going, right? So you see the sun, it's coming out of the sky, it's starting to go down behind the mountains, and the sun leaves, and there's a campfire. Well, your subconscious mind doesn't have the capacity to know those two things are not related. It will figure out like, oh, the sun went down, there's a fire. Maybe that fire is responsible. Maybe the sun going down is responsible for causing that fire there. Where the conscious logical mind would obviously know, no, they're completely
We'll be able to process
separate.
that.
Yeah. So a child operating at that mind, and what I always tell people is the subconscious mind is it's like a child operating in there. It's got the power of the Milky Way galaxy behind it, but it's got the mindset of maybe a 3 to a 5-year-old.
Yeah. So I think for parents listening to this could actually be really hugely triggering for them, because, you know, your mind goes back to, oh gosh, that time I went to work, or the time I left my child crying with somebody else, or I dropped them off at nursery and they didn't want to go and they were screaming, but I had to go to work. What can we do about that? Is it a case of those imprints are formed, the perceptions are formed, and that's that? Or can we change that earlier on? So if you've got parents sitting listening to this, thinking back and playing through those scenarios in their mind, what can we do while the children are still children to help correct some of the things that we feel like we may not have done as well as we could have done? Because we're all human, right? And we may not all be parenting as perfectly as we would potentially like to be. So what can we do to kind of guard against that, you know, any perceptions that they may have formed so far moving into the future?
Right. I think that's a great question, Rachel. And it's very important to understand that no two people are alike. So no two people are going to be alike. Whenever I hear or whenever I understand that parents might be listening to this and I say something like a self-mutilation program because a mother was fearful when she found out she was pregnant, and she told the father, and the father's like, oh no, what are we going to do? Maybe we shouldn't have this child. That can trigger a lot of parents. But here's the thing to understand too, is that perception is there, and initially, even though it's formed and the subconscious mind will protect it, like it protects any other perception you have, okay? It doesn't mean that's the fate of that child. Because
Okay.
let's say that those two parents suddenly go, you know what? We had this child, let's own up to it and let's be great parents for it. In fact, my parents weren't great in some ways and your parents weren't great in some ways, you know, or maybe they were, but I didn't like this trait about them. Let's own up to this and be the best parents we can. Well, guess what? A whole new perception gets formed in that child then. Now, even though it's initially flimsy and weak compared to the one that's already been there first, because that's a good point. There is no subconscious mind when the child is conceived in its one cell. The very first initial sensitizing event that goes in, everything after that is judged. And if it's not in harmony with that, it's usually rejected. If it is in harmony, it builds up. And that's where I was talking about earlier, the chain of magnets. However, if parents build a new perception with their child, even in the womb, or even as a, you know, maybe the kid's 5 years old, or even as teenagers, okay, even as teenagers, it's still not too late to build a new perception in that child and feed that perception. And this is the one thing that parents have on their side for parents listening. Your child is always going to need connection. That's the card that you have. Your child will always need connection, and they will always get it, whether it's from an iPad, whether it's from video games, whether it's from peers, whether it's from, you know, something else, social media. They will always get connection. So you always have that. As a ace up your sleeve. But it's not gonna. You can't force it though. You have to start slowly, build that connection, and literally work within yourself of welcoming that child, welcoming that teenager, welcoming that baby. You know, if it's in the womb, welcoming it and being thankful that it's in your presence. If you can start to feel towards your child that, hey, I'm thankful you're here. You know, my wife and I have a 9-year-old daughter, and one of the things that we have definitely instilled into her from this kind of work. Now, as you probably know, doing regressive work, that's a whole different type of work than most people are used to. And regression work is where the power really is. That's where the power to change people is. And it's definitely changed me as a healer. One thing that it's done for my wife and I is we make sure that our 9-year-old daughter Aria is very welcomed in our house, welcomed around us, and she knows that we're very happy to have her. Now, that being said, I learned all about this stuff a little too late. I should have started in the womb, but I didn't. But
Mm,
she's 9 years old. She's very happy to be around us. And it all comes down to we built a new perception and we feed that perception every day. When you do that with a child, for parents listening that want to know how to make it right, welcome your kid in their presence, welcome your child in your presence and have joy that that child's in your presence.
mm,
And you will build a new perception up, and the old perceived perception that may have gotten there before can lie dormant. Okay.
mm.
So it's
Does it
not,
just
it's,
lie dormant, or can you ever get rid of it completely, or will it just be something that's always there, but it will just be dormant in the body?
that's a great question. My work in psychosomatic work is actually about getting rid of that thing
Hmm.
completely,
Hmm.
getting rid of it completely. I will say that the only way to get rid of it is not going to be layering on positive beliefs. It's
Hmm.
not going to be hypnosis where you're layering in hypnosis. It's not going to be those kind of things.
Hmm.
Because in my opinion, you're going to be layering on something that's still a holographic, three-dimensional imprint of something,
Hmm.
and and it can be lying there dormant. But any other perceptions that come later in life can still add on to that and build that
Hmm.
up.
Hmm.
Okay. So my work is all about going back and through venting, through pillow
Hmm.
talk, through letting
Hmm.
through letting it be as ugly as it needs to be, as ugly as it needs to be sometimes,
Hmm.
and then using specific frequencies to fill that void once the person's
Hmm.
vented everything out, and then recalibrating, because it's in my opinion, going back to that event and just changing the perception of it isn't enough.
Hmm.
I've done that many times where you go back and you have them change the perception of it, and
Hmm.
the person feels better, but there's still this pent up energy. There's
Hmm.
still a bunch of pent up feelings that weren't felt, those kind of
Hmm.
things. And so they'll still have symptoms that arise, or they'll have um, symptoms that just kind of come and go. You know, maybe
Hmm.
your shoulder hurts one day, and then it's your knee, and then it's your hip,
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden you have a little bit of heartburn. These are all ways that your unconscious mind is showing you, hey, there's something that needs to be addressed, because that part of you has no ability to speak in any
Hmm.
human verbalized language.
Hmm. So it's coming out through the illness in the body, right?
Right. It's coming out
Hmm.
as the only way it can get your attention.
Hmm. And do you think that some people are more connected to their body than others? So some people just miss all the signs because they're busy, and then maybe they suppress their feelings in the evening with, maybe alcohol or something like that. So they just miss the signs that the body's trying to give you.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a
Mm,
doubt. Chris Grissom was like like a spiritual healer. She said in one of her books, she said the body is cosmic teacher. It'll speak louder and
mm,
louder to get your attention.
mm,
Um, and so what that means is uh, that's kind of the spiritual side. From the scientific side, it means when you have a feeling, your feelings produce what are called neuropeptides.
mm,
Neuropeptides are the chemical building block of emotions, trauma. If we, it- so traumatic overwhelms, boundary violations, feelings of fear, or things like that that get experienced in the womb are not just a holographic imprint. They're
mm,
also they're also formed through chemical messengers called
mhm,
neuropeptides.
mhm,
Now, these are meant to be metabolized and leave the body,
mhm,
either through sweat, tears, through breath,
mhm,
through the way we excrete waste. If they are not felt, if feelings are not felt, these neuropeptides will begin to accumulate in higher amounts and more and more and more throughout different areas of the body. And that's why you can have certain areas that um, begin to show certain signs and symptoms of
mhm,
trauma that's unprocessed. And neuropeptides will begin to almost kind of say, if they could paraphrase, they would say, hey, maybe you don't have the spiritual maturity to process this You don't have the mental, emotional maturity to process this trauma. So I'm going to hold on to it for you. I'm going to hold on to it in the form of a holographic imprint with a chemical residue. And I'm just going to hold this until you gain the maturity to go back and process it. And because people in our society and medical science and academic authorities don't teach us what this means or how to do this, we have a tremendous amount of people carrying these unprocessed, I call it like a pocket of venom within them. And because it's like a pocket of venom, it will do things to get your attention. Maybe a little redness, maybe a little itching, maybe a little swelling, and you can put a little cortisone cream on it or get a little shot. And what it will do is it will realize, okay, you're not paying attention. So now I have to up my game. I have to up my game. I have to up it a little bit more. And that's where symptoms start to become more and become more and become more spread throughout the body. They begin to, localized inflammation becomes systemic inflammation. A little nagging knee pain becomes pain that you limp every time you walk now. And you mentioned alcohol. One thing that's very important is that when a person sedates themselves, they drink a lot of alcohol, they smoke marijuana, or they're just taking prescription painkillers, even NSAIDs. And the research in PubMed, you can Google PubMed. What is it? It's taking Tylenol for heartbreak. So people that have had heartbreak, they can take a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and that pain will go away. So when people are using these substances, more often than not, they are doing that because of unconscious pain that they're repressing. And of course, that's what I did for years and years. Every kind of drug you can imagine, from my troubled youth all the way up, was all because of trying to escape that pain. And if you look at Keith Richards' biography, he was the Rolling Stone guitarist who had a severe heroin addiction. There's one line that really summarizes all of those usage of drugs, including alcohol. And he says all the contortions we put ourselves through just not to be ourselves for a few hours. And the question is, well, why would a person not want to be themselves? Because they're afraid of three things, according to Harvey Lang, legendary psychologist. They're afraid of dying, they're afraid of other people, and they're afraid of their own mind.
I think a lot of people are afraid of their own mind, actually, and their own emotions. They're too scared to feel stuff. When I've regressed clients, I found it so fascinating, the stuff that some of them have held on to. So I've had a client, an older lady, who was crying so much because she remembered a memory where her mother had told her that her teddy bear had been lost, and her teddy bear hadn't been lost, and she was searching for it. And then eventually the mother had to admit that she had chucked it away, and it was her favorite teddy bear. And because she wasn't happy in the family home, the teddy bear meant everything to her. That was the connection that you're talking about. She was connected so heavily to this teddy, and she was sobbing about this teddy. And she's held on to that for 50 odd years. It was incredible. It was fascinating to watch.
Right. Oh yeah. And that's what I mean by connection. And they're going to get it some way. They're going to get it some way. It's a biological necessity. Connection is. We're born on this earth with two biological connections. Okay. They're necessities. The first one is to need to connect. And that is the whole purpose of an infant. When you see an infant, it needs to connect to a mother, some kind of figure, because without that connection, it would not survive. So it's hardwired in to be connected. That's one. The second connection is a need to be the authentic self. So So basically, as a soul coming to Earth, we have a contract in place, and we already know our place whenever we're born into this
Mm,
world. And now a lot of that gets lost, but one thing we know as an infant, as a person as a developing fetus in the womb, and as a newborn baby, we love everything about ourselves. We
mm,
love everything about ourselves. We love ourselves head to toe. We even love our own feces. Okay, as Lewis Hay said, we even love our own feces until we learn that that's not right, and
mm,
it's not good. It's disgusting. But whenever we are in that phase of being connected to our authentic self, and you can sometimes see this in children, they don't have filters. They speak their mind. That's
yeah.
why if that's why if you had a group of children here that were 5 years old, and let's say you were going to bake dessert for them, and you had two judges that were going to come watch this, you could make these desserts for a group of adults and wouldn't have near the tension or the anxiety or the worry as if you made it for a group of kids, because they'll
Mm,
tell you right away on their face there's no filters. No filters kids have, right? Why? Because they're speaking from their authentic self.
yeah.
That's another biological necessity. Now, what
Mm,
happens is when a child is going through the developing process, becoming a preteen and then a teenager, they get almost ignored or shut down, or they
mm,
learn somewhere along the process that um, they don't matter. What they have to say doesn't matter.
mm, mm,
Usually, it comes like you were given the example of a girl who or a baby whose or child's mom has to go to work,
mm,
and this means she doesn't love me. Well, I would say something like that. That child will also learn that if my tummy hurts and I go interrupt mom and mom's busy, she's going to get mad. So I'll just kind of keep quiet.
mm,
And that becomes what's called the curse of perfectionism. Okay.
mm,
Maybe if I'm better, mom and dad won't yell so much. Maybe if I act better, mom and dad won't yell so much. So the whole idea of maybe if I'm better starts to suppress that authentic self. They start to
mm,
realize that I want to say this, but I won't. I should say this, but I won't. Because they know that if they express something to their parents who are already stressed out, it's going to make the parents even more stressed. So
mm,
they learn to separate. They learn to separate from their gut feelings.
mm,
And that's something you'll see very common in the Western world and in
mm,
the advanced civilizations. What you'll see is a tremendous amount of people separated from their authentic self, from their gut feelings.
yeah.
Earlier, you were saying um, people going to work, saying goodbye to their child, doing all these things. Uh, when kids pick up on things that um, they get these perceptions that they're not loved or something. Well, I'll tell you this, and this might be a bold statement,
Mm,
but if a parent is connected to their gut feelings, they won't do anything to make a child feel that way.
mm,
So usually a parent's disconnected from their gut feelings. I have to go make a living. I got to do this. I got to do that. And
mm,
there's something inside of them saying, hey, your child needs some comfort at this time.
mm,
And that begins the process of passing on this perception that a child receives that the parent, uh, gives them indirectly, that
mm,
they're not good enough. Right.
mm,
So people ask, well, what do gut feelings do for you? Or I've heard some people say, I followed my gut feelings and they led me to trouble. And I
mm,
have to tell them, and I say, just as you can already tell, uh, no, your gut feelings don't lie to you. Your
mm,
gut feelings are a survival, divinely built-in GPS. And when you look at tribal areas, people
mm,
around the world that are still very nomadic, very primitive. They're not part of the civilized, industrial countries. Amazon people that are Aborigines in Australia, for
mm,
example, um, Hansa territory is a good example. These people. without the science, are very in tune to the mind
Mm,
and body.
mm,
They know that they're inseparable. So much to the point to where in a tribe, if there is a pregnant woman and there's a man in that tribe who's angry,
mm,
all the men will gather that man and take him out for a walk away from the tribe, and all the men will begin to tell him what an asset he is, how valuable he is, how much they need him in that tribe, and how important he is to calm that man down and let him realize that he's part of the bunch and he's necessary.
mm,
But the point is, they cool it down that way, and they separate him from that pregnant woman. That's
mm,
how in tune they are with that. These people
mm,
stay connected to their gut feelings their entire life, and it
mm,
serves them well. It serves
mm,
them well. Imagine an Aborigine in Australia somewhere out in the middle of nowhere who needs to find water for his family.
mm,
And he has a container and he's walking around in these places, and I've seen some of the pictures. They're kind of fascinating. I've read some of the reports about them. You'll see these people out there in the middle of nowhere and they're hunting and they're doing everything, living off the land, but yet they're wearing like an Under Armour t-shirt or something,
mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So so but let's say they have a container and they need water for someone in their family.
Mm,
They'll go out and search until they find water, a water hole. And when they're going to get the water, something inside of them says, don't do it. Stop. No. That's that universal subconscious mind I was talking about. They'll
mm,
stop and they will actually walk on and leave that water until they go find another spot.
mm,
So let's say a civilized man from the United States um, flies into Australia and he wants to see the outback, and he flies in there and let's say he's a wealthy businessman, completely detached from his gut feelings, but he's all about business, right? No heart, just business. And
mm,
he's driving through in his Jeep, and he's driving through in his Jeep, and he comes across that same water hole, and he pulls out his canteen and he goes to put water in there, and
mm,
his gut feelings could be saying, no, stop. But he hasn't listened to him. He got
mm,
separated long ago. He goes to put his canteen that water, and a big crocodile grabs him. So what's the difference between these two? The gut feelings protected the person who listened to him,
yeah.
and the other person completely ignored their gut feelings. And that's what we're seeing today. If you look around the world,
Mm,
we're seeing a tremendous amount of people detached from their gut feelings, and
mm,
that detachment is making them suffer in some way, shape, or form. They're
mm.
not listening to that internal GPS.
Yeah. And I find it really rare actually to meet people that are truly authentic and do stand in their truth and are really connected. And I think I find that really sad actually. And I see it makes me really frustrated when I see people telling children not to cry and to be quiet. And that phrase when I was younger, people always say to us, children should be seen and not heard, you know
Right.
and things like that
More,
have such a powerful impact, I think, on people. And the labels, I was I've always been quite a spirited person, but I was labeled the naughty one in our family, and I've carried that a long time and always felt like, oh, I need to go down this route, and ended up going down the sort of corporate path because that was kind of what was expected. And it's only been in the last sort of 5 or 6 years actually that I've kind of started to realize who I am again, what's important to me and what my passions are. But I'm 42, so it's taken me all of that time to figure that out myself and get to the place I am now. But there's still a lot of people in that place where they're pleasing people, they're doing what they feel like they should do, what society expects of them. And this all contributes, right, to the disconnection with self, because we're following a path that someone else has set for us, not a path that we've set for ourselves.
that's exactly right. And there's a saying that most people achieve success in their 40s
Mm,
because they've successfully began to unlearn everything they learned before.
yeah,
And that's definitely what happened in my case, and it
yeah,
sounds like that's exactly what happened in your case, you know.
absolutely. But
But you're right. But you're right, that saying of children are meant to be seen, not heard.
Mm,
Untold damage from that right
mm,
there.
mm. Where do you think we've gone so wrong as a society? I mean, were we always historically more connected, and then over a period of time that's just eroded? Where did it start going wrong? What's your view on that?
Well, I think that anything that has the ability to create a significant change has been hidden from us. And I
Mm,
think that if we look around at society today and you look at pieces that have made it and survived time, and specific aspects of religion, like I was talking about with the way Christ said that,
mm,
um, pe pieces of religion that have survived, aspects of pieces of history that have made it, were all once part of one system.
mm,
And this is my beliefs. I mean, I've spent the last half a decade putting together and studying everything from hermetic principles to the CIA's remote viewing, you know,
mm,
and understanding this larger capacity, this larger mind. And I think that many of those things came from one system years and years, like before the the Egyptian
mm,
um pyramids and
mhm,
technology and all that. And it's since then been separated. And I think that there is a I think that this separation from gut feelings
mm,
is what makes people react with their conscious mind rather than their
mm,
heart.
mm,
Okay. And when you look at things like the political turmoil going on, that is a reflection of what people have done.
mm, mm,
It's real easy to blame the political aspect, but you look at the reflection of people as a whole, and it's a mathematical reflection of that.
mm,
On top of that, and I don't want to go into huge conspiracies, but the politics are just kind of in the middle,
mhm,
and there's a greater echelon at the top to where the entire globe is run by, a
mm,
few thousand people. And I think these people know this. They know the laws. They know the
mm,
universal laws. They know the laws of the mind.
mm.
And rather than contribute that, it's much easier to control people.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
by controlling people, you have things like Rockefeller medicine. You have
Mhm,
things to where the birth process, which should be a very wonderful process
mm,
where the baby's welcomed, is now a medical, sometimes emergency procedure.
yeah.
You know, so um,
And I
I
think
think
that,
it's
sorry to interrupt you, that
no, go right ahead.
that process of the medicalized birth that seems to be hugely increasing is a major factor in the disconnection, because that happened to me. I had an emergency C-section, and then you find, and a lot of people I've spoken to who've had a similar experience, you feel very disconnected from the child from the point of them being born. What should be a joyful, loving, lovely experience actually is really disconnected, it's sad, then you have trouble breastfeeding, and it's all compounds the same problem. And then a lot of the mothers end up with postnatal depression, and then they can't connect with their child even further, and it just becomes a vicious cycle.
Exactly right. But you look back on these people thousands of years ago with pregnant women, what did they do? The pregnant women there's depictions of them, there's pictures, there's images of
Mm,
pregnant women squatting.
yeah, just squatting down and
You
delivering the baby themselves in the most
exactly
beautiful, natural way, how it was intended to be.
right. So using gravity versus having a woman, and I worked in a hospital for a year and a half. I mean,
Mm,
I've seen the statistics of how rapidly C-sections are becoming the norm.
mm,
Both my all my children were born through that way,
mm,
C-section. And looking at it, it's like they weren't even allowed to get out of bed. They weren't allowed to walk around. It's
mm,
just push, push, push. Oh, we're gonna have to do this. And it's become in a way that one day, just like right now, we can look back and see those depictions of those women. One
mm,
day, one day people are going to look back at what we're doing today in modern
Mm,
society, and we're
mm,
going to label this barbaric,
yeah.
barbaric, because it's we don't honor the mind body the way we should. We
Mm,
keep them separate. Uh, Psychology and psychiatry are bred from the same ones that do illness management. So
mm,
they're master chemists of, manipulating the brain chemistry.
mm,
Okay. Um, and when you look at things like, I'll just say this: Xanax is my arch nemesis, and I'm sure that you probably seen the same thing. When you have a client come to you and wants to do regressive work,
mm,
let's say they're on a plethora of benzodiazepines. It's messy. It's a
mm,
nightmare. Um, so uh, barbaric is kind of putting it nicely on
mm,
where we're moving in the future and what the medicine of the future is going to be. I firmly believe right now it's going to be about perception shifts.
mm,
It's about learning how to love ourselves and
mm,
learning how to connect with nature. We hear
yeah.
this connecting with nature all the time, and as nature is very healing.
Mm,
Um, but we need to learn to love ourselves a lot more. We need to learn
mm,
to get back to our authentic selves and listening to our gut feelings and not the reaction of fear-based propaganda and things like that.
mm. And do you think we will get to that place? I feel like we're so far away from it, but at the same time, I see so many people awakening to so many things, listening more to their soul, feeling more connected, wanting to do more stuff in nature. But it still feels like a long way away from where we need to be in terms of everyone in that place. So even though I feel like there's huge inroads in terms of people seeking alternative ways to manage their health and their mental state, it still feels a long way off. What's your view on that? Do you think
I
we'll
think
get
throughout
there?
his I think throughout history, anytime that you have a society based on um, false false notions, okay?
Mm,
When you have a society right now based on the notion that we are nothing more than physical beings,
mm,
flesh robots, uh, that can only maintain itself for too long because it's not in congruence with universal laws.
yeah.
So once that starts to collapse, something new comes out of it.
Mm,
And that's just the way the universe works. The pendulum
mm,
swings both ways, right?
mm,
There's always seasons, and the pendulum is always swinging one way or another. So right now we're seeing kind of the extreme, and we've seen that, and what that's done is it's automatically started the process for its exact opposite.
mm, mm,
And one thing we've seen over the last few years of all the propaganda, all the fear-based
mm,
tactics, all the
mm,
lies, all the lies that are starting to come out now based
mm,
on the things that once we were told true and now it's not true at all.
mm.
What that's doing is it's breeding people to go into higher conscious states.
Yeah.
So, so we are absolutely merging into something new and exciting. And it
Mm,
has to. Every time something builds up and it can no longer sustain itself and it crumbles, something much more organized and orderly comes out of it.
mm.
And that's just kind of the natural process of how the universe works with the pendulum swinging.
Yeah. It'd be an incredible place to get to, I think, once we arrive at destination.
Right,
Um,
right.
Sorry, I know we're running out of time, but there was just one more thing that I wanted to ask you if have you got 5 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So it was about generational trauma actually, because I remember reading a book a few years ago that was called, what's it called? The Trauma Didn't Start with You, I believe. And
Right.
it was talking about how so if you imagine a pregnant mother also has then the ovaries and the eggs and everything it within the baby. So in one person who's pregnant, you've actually got three generations in there experiencing the emotions that the grandmother essentially is going through. If that does that make sense? And that absolutely blew my mind in terms of the generational trauma. And then in this book, he was talking about how some people experience in this lifetime feelings and emotions that aren't based on any trauma that they've personally experienced, but it's been passed down through generations. I was just wondering, what you know about that and how that works, and if that's true in your case, and whether you've had people go back to sort of previous lives or things that weren't actually related to them but to something within their family.
It's absolutely true. In fact,
Mm.
my client earlier today, today was my first time working with this gentleman, and he has this just this overall panic. And I see this a few times with panic, and I'll share another story after this, but this happened
Mm.
earlier today. Regress to cause. Um, what we do is we find that icon of memory, and I have him describe it to a T. I have him
Mm.
describe exactly what it's like, the
Mm.
temperature, the smells, everything about it, to where he could draw it like a picture.
Mm.
And then we have him go right through that, right through the center and all the way back. And I have him give me his very first impression when he gets there.
Mm.
And whenever they start to talk, I have specific questions as it starts to bring it up. And one of the things I do is have him look at their hands in that scene. And he looks at his hands and he says, "Are really, really old hands." And he's a younger guy. And I said, "Okay, male hands, female hands?" He goes, "Male hands." And I said, "What's your name in this scene?" And he said, "Carlos." And he goes, "It's my father's father." He knew
Mm.
it, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And there was a very poverty-stricken time, and there was a tremendous amount of suffering. And
Mm.
then they were getting nudged on foreclosure, the only place they had. So again, this overall panic had nothing to do with anything that he had in his life. It had to do with something 2 generations back.
Mm.
This might sound odd to people, but it's been proven. Um, uh, Elman, I think it is, Medical Institute, has verified that they can pass traumatic cellular memories down from
Mm.
mice. They took a group of mice and they gave them the scent of cherries and almonds, and then
Mm-hmm.
they would give them a mild electric shock. They'd let them smell cherries, shock them, smell cherries, they would shock them, smell cherries and shock them. And then these mice actually had offspring. Those mice had offspring. These mice had offspring, and they let 3 generations later smell the cherry scent, and the mice tremble with fear,
Oh,
even though
wow.
even though for 3 generations they
They
had
hadn't had
never,
the electric shock.
no, they had not associated with it. So they know that this stuff is very real. Um, on top of that, uh, the soul can take infinite forms.
Mm.
There's been many times when I've regressed people back, and to find a very source of where that is, and it's something in their morphic field. It's
Mm.
like a memory happened, an overwhelm that had some kind of resonance, and maybe it was, very similar frequency to what that person was carrying, and we
Mm.
went after that. I have them go to a scene. I had a woman who a very high functioning president of her company.
Mm.
Okay. She's got several Porsches. She's just a very, very professional, high
Mm.
functioning executive type mindset. She comes to me. We regress to cause, and she's seeing this blue, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's a sky, maybe it's this, but I don't apply that. I don't tell
Yeah.
her. I just ask a few more questions and look at your hands in this. She looks down at her hands, and she has completely webbed hands, completely webbed hands.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, uh, again, I let her play the scene out. There was a moment of overwhelm. We learn what we're supposed to learn from it, get the
Mm.
good out of it, change it how we need to. But once that happens, the feelings that they were carrying, the emotional charge of whatever they had carried their whole life was completely gone, and it was
Mm.
from something that we couldn't even explain. I had a guy contact me a while back from um, a certain area in Russia he lived in, and this man was pretty wealthy. He had multiple homes in different countries, and he had such severe panic attacks that he was doing something wrong and they were out to get him. No
Mm.
idea why. No idea why. and he actually had a team of attorneys he'd constantly get on the phone with and say, double check everything, make sure everything's good. And they would go through all his works and his businesses and, through layers and layers of papers and his paper trails and everything else. And they'd say, look, everything's fine. You're totally fine. Everything's good. And this had plagued him so bad to where another energy worker that worked with him referred him to me, and we regressed him to cause. And there he was back in World War II as a Jewish man hiding from Nazis in a building.
Mm.
And they were searching the building he was in. And that formed an overwhelming holographic imprint that through, our bodies are holographic, our universe is holographic. Some kind of holographic imprint was formed in this man, passed down, and it had nothing to do with him or family, but it was something from that timeline that was affecting him vastly. And
Wow.
so, yeah, when you do this work, one of the first things I do is anchor the person in safety fully. I anchor them in
Yeah.
safety several different ways because I've learned no matter where we go, we never know where we're going to end up.
Yeah, it's fascinating
So,
to see what comes up, I think, isn't it? I've never had anyone go back to a past life, but I've heard lots of stories of people who have gone back, and it's fascinating to hear what comes up.
right.
Yeah. So, Gabe, if anybody wants to get in touch with you or work with you, what's the best way of them to get in contact with you if they want? Do you work internationally, firstly?
I do. I work across the globe, 100% through Zoom. We run a spiritual ministry because my whole philosophy is basically I've studied about 300 near-death experiences in depth.
Mm.
I've interviewed over half a dozen people that have had the experience of leaving the physical body, what
Mm.
it's like when they leave the physical body. I have had people die in regressions. Like we regress them back to a person and they die, and I've taken them through the death process to see what that's like, right?
Wow.
To learn what they're supposed to learn.
Mm.
And this has made me become very spiritual. So understanding that's what happens when we leave the physical body. I
Mm.
also have a good idea what happens when we're born into this world as well,
Mm.
when we're conceived. So my whole philosophy is to take people back to the moment before we ever lost that disconnection to
Mm.
divine,
Mm.
and get them connected to the divine in whatever way that comes to them, whatever way they interpret it. But that's where the loveness, that's where the love, the forgiveness, and the real healing takes place.
Mm.
I'm a diplomat in nutrition, and I've watched people take the best of the best nutrition, vitamin C, everything, and still be plagued with infections. We get them
Mm.
connected to divine and infinite, and everything in their body changes, rapidly
Mm.
overnight.
Mm.
So the best way to get a hold of me is the subconscioushealer.com.
Mm-hmm.
And um, in June, we are opening the doors for Psychosomatic University. And this is an accredited university where we offer bachelor's, master's degrees, and PhDs in in-depth analysis of what the mind is, what the
Mm.
mind beyond the body is, how thoughts affect things, how thoughts affect everything from water to plants to cells to cell functions.
Mm.
Understanding the mind in a very, very um, in-depth way, and how to begin to interact with that mind and how to talk to the subconscious mind as easy as
Mm.
you're dialoguing with apps on your cell phone,
Mm.
and as well as on the PhD, work for the most terminal of ill. So people
Mm.
that have severe autoimmune cancers, things that are not responsive to anything else.
Mm.
Uh, we have education equipping professional students
Mm.
that want results on how to deal with the most terminal of illness when nothing else has worked. So,
Amazing. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that and wanting to potentially learn more about the courses and the masters and the PhD that you offer as part of Psychosomatic University, how do they find that? Is it a process of applying for it, or what's the process for people?
right, just like any other university that apply for it,
Hmm.
there'll be some interviews in place. And if they're a good fit, we find out. I'm more interested in, honestly, I'm more interested in what a person's heart's desire are. If their gut feelings are desiring to go out and help others, remove suffering, show people what's possible, show people what's possible. I'm more interested in that kind of prereqs than how much organic chemistry you've had and all those other things. That me as a chiropractor, I've taken so many courses and learned so much. And as far as healing goes, it turns out to be nearly meaningless. It's the same with medical schools. I have medical doctors that are friends. They have told me throughout their entire medical education, the only time they ever heard the word healing was whenever they were putting a bandage on certain
a cut or
wounds.
something, a wound.
Right. So
Wow.
same with me as a licensed educated chiropractor. There's not a lot of emphasis on healing. It's just heavy sciences, getting through the programs, passing the boards, and that's it. And that's what my wife and I want to change. We want to offer people an educational system where you're accredited, but you're literally an equipped super healer with classes that are formatted to show you exactly all the things that go into healing, show you all the things that are the causes of illness and why.
Oh, it's amazing. I am so grateful to you for your time, your knowledge, your wisdom. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but we must draw it to a close. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time. And if anybody is interested in the Psychosomatic University or working directly with Gabe, then I will put all of the links in the show notes so you can contact him really easily. So once again, Gabe, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I hope our paths cross again at some point soon.
Awesome, Rachel. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.